Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. So I'm playing my Dwarves once again, 2500 points. We decided to do a sort of fluffy list, so we're using the Triple Crown comp system. We've gone for a big plus. This one comes in at a +4, so I brought out the Slayers again, because they give me plus to comp each of those. 2 units of 20 Slayers. Neither of them have Musician, one of them's got a banner, and there's some different champions in there. So the old Demon Dragon Slayer models I'm using as regular champions, so they're normal Giant Slayers. And I've got my Dwarf Lord in the middle there. I don't normally take a Dwarf Lord. It's the first time I'm taking a Dwarf Lord on Shield Bearers. Apologies to those who like the fluff of the, the dwarf standing atop a shield with the 2 Shield Bearers. I don't know, I've never been a huge fan of it, I guess because I played Warhammer back in 4th and 5th edition, where dwarves always had the option to put your dwarf as a Dwarf King on the throne of power with 4 Shield Bearers, or Throne Bearers. But just having a dwarf balancing on a shield with 2 Shield Bearers, I don't know. I've never been a huge fan of it. It's an easy enough conversion to do, I suppose. But I had this model which I really liked, and it's kind of a big model, and I think it would look a bit silly if I tried to balance him on top of a shield. So I've got him on a rock with the 2 Shield Bearers are holding big shields in front of him. So it's a dwarf with Shield Bearers as opposed to a dwarf on Shield Bearers. But this is my sort of tanky Dwarf Lord loadout, or my cheap tanky Dwarf Lord loadout. So he's got a Rune of Stone, a Rune of Iron, and 3 runes of Warding. So for 261 points, you get a very tanky Dwarf Lord with 6 wounds, 1 up save, and a 4 up ward. Can't really go wrong with that. He's pretty much unkillable. I do sometimes like to add the Rune of Preservation as well for 25 points, which gives you a 2 up ward against Killing Blow. Which I didn't go for this time because I suppose I was just short on points at the end. But I'm playing Ogres, so the Killing Blow hopefully won't be a big deal. I'm not sure how much access they have to Killing Blow. Top left there you can see 30 Dwarf Warriors with Hand Weapon and Shield. Top right there you've got the 20 Longbeards with Great Weapons. The good thing about the Dwarf Lord as well is that you can put him in one of these units that's just 5 wide, and of course the Dwarf Lord is 2 wide, so depending on what sort of unit you come up against in the front, there'll be some of the models in the enemy unit will have to throw attacks into the Dwarf Lord, and of course you're not going to do much to that Dwarf Lord, so it's a good way of sort of minimising the attacks you get on your unit. I think that could be particularly helpful with Ogres because obviously they've got the wider base, they've got lots of attacks, and they get all the supporting attacks as well. So hopefully I can force the Ogres to throw loads of attacks into the Dwarf Lord and bounce off him, and that'll help me win combat. Got the War Machines there, so it's one of each of the main War Machines: Orc and Gun, Stone Thrower, Cannon, and Flame Cannon. Again, because of the comp system that we're playing, I'll put a link in the description actually, those of you who don't know it, to the Triple Crown website there. You can look at their comp system, but it's basically plus and minuses for different units that you take depending on how soft they are, or also depending on how sort of unseen they are, like you know, models that you don't see on the tabletop that regularly. They like to encourage people to take them, so depending on what faction you use, a higher comp will mean that it's a softer army, but not always, but generally speaking. And I've got the other characters there, so I've got my Thane BSB, Master Rune of Grugny, Runesmith, Rune of Spellbreaking, and a Rune of Stone, Engineer with a Great Weapon, and yeah, I think that's about all you need to know. Let's look at the Ogres. Oh yeah, I should also mention there's 2 gyrocopters which aren't in the picture because I just forgot to take them out of my bag at the time I took the photo, but there's another 2 gyrocopters on there as well. So the Ogres from left to right there. You may be thinking why there's some Savage Orc Boar Boys in the photo, but they're actually being proxied as Saber Tusks. Now, Scott informs me that there's a very cheeky way of raising the comp of an Ogre army, because you take a Hunter with a big name and in a unit of 5 Saber Tusks, and that gives you +3 to comp. So you have 2 of those and you're on +6 to comp, and they're pretty handy as well because they're a big group of cats with 2 wounds and 3 attacks or something like that. The Hunter himself is like a hero level character, and he's quite handy. So you've got a fast unit, which you know, the Hunter has very special rules. They're not going to be taken out quickly, and then they can zip up the flanks and be a real pain. And it's got, like, you know, how many wounds has it got there? What, 5 times 2? It's got like 14 wounds or something. So it's pretty tasty, and it's giving you +6 to comp. I think he also had units that were 6 or under, giving me another +2s. He's on like +8, and then he gets minuses for things like standard, discipline, and iron blasters, which you'll see in a minute. Anyway, so on the left there, you've got Sabertusk with the hunter. You've got 4 bulls with extra hand weapons. You've then got the main unit, which is the Iron Guts. There's 6 of them, and there's 3 characters. So you've got the Slaughter Master at the front there. You've got the Firebelly on the second rank, and you've got the BSB as well, the Bruiser BSB at the front. The 2 Iron Blasters there are sort of hiding behind the building, but you can just see them in the picture. There's another unit of 6 bulls with the Iron Fists, 3 Mournfang Cavalry, and then on the flank there, there's the second unit of the Hunter with his pack of cats. So here we are deployed for the battle line scenario. I tried to be a bit cagey with my deployment, putting a gyrocopter on each flank, putting a unit of Slayers right in the middle, so he was a bit unsure as to which side of the centre line I'd be deploying my forces. And in the end I deployed them on the right hand side there, so I'm facing off directly against those Mournfang Cavalry and that unit of 6 bulls. And his main unit of Iron Guts is slightly detached more further away from me, so with a bit of luck I could deal with that Mournfang Cavalry first, and then be able to have enough left to face his main unit sort of in turn 3 or 4 a little bit later on in the game. So as you can see there, I've got my war machines quite tight within my units of dwarves, Slayers on either side. The main block, my Dwarf Lord, is in the Dwarf Warriors, so I'm hoping that'll be the, the anvil, whereas the the Slayers and the Longbeards are the hammer. And it's really that all pinning on that Dwarf Warrior unit with the Dwarf Lord. If I can take it, if I can survive a charge from those Mournfang Cavalry or from those Iron Guts, then I think I've got enough there in the other dwarves with great weapons to finish things off. And of course the Slayers are very useful because they don't run away, so it's always good to have an unbreakable unit. There are only 20 models, but what does he have there that's going to chew through 20 Slayers at toughness 4 in one turn? I don't think he's got anything there that's going to cause all 20 wounds and blow through them. So hopefully those Slayers should do me proud this game, as they normally do. I rolled a 3 for the Ancestral Grudge, which means my characters hate his characters. And for his spells, he didn't roll too good actually, so I believe on his level 4 he had the +1 strength, the stubborn augment spells, he had the Maw, and he had the magic missile, which is like strength 2, which isn't very good against dwarves at all. And then he took fireball on the level 1 Firebelly. So it's lots of action in turn 1 as the Ogres get first turn after vanguarding with their hunter and cat packs. They then push them much further up the board, putting instant pressure on my grudge thrower and cannon. The 2 Iron Blasters swivel round from that building and take out the organ gun on turn 1 before the organ gun has even got a chance to shoot. That's a big blow to me, as I was really hoping on at least one good volley on that Mournfang Cavalry to even up the odds a bit. Everything else just sort of charges forward, and the magic phase is pretty much uneventful. On Dwarf turn 1 then, I take a look at that Mournfang Cavalry unit, which is 15 inches away from me, and I think to myself, right, on Ogre's turn 2, if he gets a semi-decent roll, that Mournfang Cavalry unit is going to be onto my line straight away. Can't let that unit charge me because it has big impact hits, and of course they're striking at initiative the same as me anyway, so I'm going to lose a lot of dwarves, and there's a chance I could lose combat, and things could go horribly wrong if that Mournfang Cavalry gets a really decent charge, especially as it's supported by a unit of Ogres there as well. So I think, let's just go for it, and I declare a charge with my Dwarf Warriors and my Slayers. They need double 6s, they both fail, but of course they get quite a decent roll actually. I think I rolled an 11 and we both kind of gasped thinking, oh my god, do I have it? But they both fail, and they both move forward 6 inches, which is what they would have marched anyway, and my gyrocopter comes in to chaff up that Mournfang Cavalry. So I'm hoping, because my dwarves are a lot closer to the Mournfang now, that next turn, because that gyrocopter is being annoying, I'll be able to get the charge on that Mournfang Cavalry unit. The Slayers and the Longbeards sort of move forward and pivot a little bit to deal with what's coming next. And the Grudge Thrower, unfortunately, I think it took a couple of wounds from the second Iron Blaster, So I lost my organ gun, I lost 2 wounds on the grudge thrower. It's got that other pack of cats bearing down on it, and there's not much I can do about it. However, I do get a good shot with the grudge thrower, and I manage to take out one of the iron blasters. So tit for tat, I lose my organ gun, he uses one of his iron blasters. So pretty successful turn 1 for both of us, and things are looking okay for me on the right hand side of the board, with the exception of that grudge thrower, which doesn't have long to live now. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that Scott kindly let me slightly alter the position of my gyrocopter, because we realised that actually the way that that ogre ball unit was positioned next to that Mournfang cavalry, the ogres would get in the way of each other and they wouldn't be able to close the door properly. So as we realised that, Scott very kindly let me just swivel the gyrocopter, so if those Mournfang cavalry did charge, they would go heading off towards the wood there. So ogres turn 2, and on the left side of the board, the gyrocopter there that had previously just taken a wound off one of the cats gets charged by the ogre balls and decides to flee. In the middle of the board there, his bus of ogres is marching up and now within decent charge range of my lines. On the right hand side, his Mournfang cavalry and his ogre balls are looking at the situation with 3 blocks of dwarfs facing them, outnumbered, with the gyrocopter tracking up the Mournfang cavalry, and they just decide to move back. Probably quite a good move, although a bit cowardly, seeing as they've just marched up at full speed and now they're retreating. But considering they don't have a possibility of getting a good double charge into my lines, that's probably the best way to preserve their lives at this point in time. In terms of the magic phase, now what happened now? I think we've lost 1 slayer I can see in the picture there, perhaps from a fireball or something. I was still within range of the Master Rune of Grugny, so I was getting a 5-up ward against the magic missiles. And I think I managed to dispel the Maw. I think I used my scroll on the Maw. I can't remember whether that was turn 2 or turn 3, but I did use my scroll on the Maw at some point, because obviously we're only initiative 2, and a big template on top of my warriors there could be devastating if it gets a good hit. Ah yes, and of course that cat pack has munched through the grudge thrower there, getting revenge for its direct hit on the iron blaster, and I've got this pack of cats with a hunter behind my lines. Not really a whole lot I can do about it, because there doesn't seem to be a point, at least on my next turn, turning around my blocks of dwarves, because I've got ogres in front of me, and that pack of cats could charge any unit it wants. So I've just got to deal with the situation, really. Dwarfs turn 2, so we rally the gyrocopter. We declare charges with the same 2 units again, so the dwarf warriors with the lord and that unit of slayers into the Mournfang cavalry again. I've also got a charge with the gyrocopter because he's in the way, and we fail. I couldn't believe it. They both needed a 9, neither of them got in there, so the gyrocopter ended up going in by himself against that Mournfang cavalry, and I thought, oh gosh, this gyrocopter has thrown away his life, and all that's going to happen is that he'll win combat on my turn and then get to charge me on his turn. But that's the way it goes sometimes. It's a dice game, and you fail your charges and it mucks up your plans. However, I did have some luck on the other side, so my cannon I thought I'd make him take some lookout sirs on that main Iron Gut unit, and he passed the lookout sirs, but I went through 3 ogres, so that was quite a good shot from the cannon, doing 9 wounds on that Iron Gut unit. Fantastic. Flame cannon as well, I think it pivoted to shoot those cats behind me, and I think it got a good hit and did a few wounds, but they didn't panic, so I've still got this pack of cats behind my lines. What are you going to do? And in the close combat phase, the gyrocopter dives nose first into the Mournfang cavalry in despair that his dwarf comrades haven't made it into combat with him, hacking and slashing, bellowing his steam gun, and he manages to cause a wound. Hurrah! The Mournfang cavalry fail their 2-up armor save or whatever, and they completely fluff their attacks back, only causing 2 wounds on the gyrocopter. Not only does the gyrocopter survive, but it's a drawn combat, and just a fantastic result. Henceforth, the pilot should be called Boric the Brave for holding up this unit of Mournfang cavalry for at least a turn before he dies. fantastic result for the Dwarves there, because obviously we don't have to take that charge, hopefully, next turn, as the Mournfang Cavalry are held up for another round of combat. So it's Ogre's turn 3, and the Dwarves are surveying the battlefield thinking, right, it's the big men against the small men, and now it's time to fight. However, the incoming charges that we thought were coming didn't materialise. The main block of Iron Guts failed their charge against the Slayers. We did get those cats coming in, of course, in the rear of my Slayers on the right hand side, and in the side of my cannon on the left hand side. In addition, there was the unit of Ogre Bulls that charged the Gyrocopter on my left flank. Not much I could do about that. I was hoping he might just ignore the Gyrocopter and carry on to help the main part of the fight, but there's a Gyrocopter as a sitting duck there, takes the charge, and of course the Mournfang Cavalry are still locked in combat with the Gyrocopter. So he manages to get off the Toothcracker, +1 strength spell, into one of the units of cats there, and they blow through the cannon and hit the side of the Slayer unit. The other unit of cats causes a bunch of wounds on the Slayers on the right hand side. Obviously the Unbreakable units there anyway, so that's just a stalemate for now. And this unit of Ogre Bulls charges into the Gyrocopter, only does 2 wounds, and the Gyrocopter sticks. And it's funny how the second time that's happened this game, that these small helicopters, which look as if they should be quite easy to get off the board, are actually toughness 5 for 3 wounds and have a 4-up save. So they're not that easy to get off the board, especially when, of course, they've got a relatively small base, so you're not getting as many attacks as you would like. And so, well done, Gyrocopters. And in Dwarf turn 3, the counter charges could begin. So the Longbeards need a 10 to get into that unit of Iron Guts with the characters in it. Now, I wasn't sure what Scott was thinking at this point, whether he was going to try for my Longbeards, because I think they backed up previously, expecting the charge to come in, which failed. Because he tried to charge the Slayers last turn, I thought, well, maybe now the cats have got into combat with the Slayers, you might try the Longbeards next. Either way, those Slayers needed help because they couldn't take on the 2 units at the same time. So I've gone with the Longbeards, and I roll a 10, and they make it into combat. And at the time, I was really happy with that. I thought it could be a game-winning move, because obviously my Longbeards are strength 7 on the charge there. They're pretty tasty. I've got the Thane, who has hatred, of course, against the characters in front of him. I've got the Runesmith, which gives me extra armor piercing as well. I'm not sure if I'll need that, but we don't know what these characters have got. And so I was pretty confident about being able to do a fair amount of wounds there, but we'll see. That's the Slayers, obviously still pinned in the flank from the Hunter and the Cats. So the Slayers on the right-hand flank had lost a lot of wounds, a lot of guys from the previous charge from those Cats, although they'd done a lot of wounds back, because of course they get all those death blows. And the Hunter was on 1 wound, one of the Cats was on 1 wound, and I then charged the Engineer, the lone Engineer who lost his organ gun comrades on turn 1, who was sort of floating around at the back there with nothing to do, then charged in the rear of that Cat pack. So hopefully with the Engineer in the back there and the rest of the Slayers, I can finish off those Cats in the close combat phase, and I think that's exactly what we did. I think we took off the last wound of that unit on my turn. However, the main action was further up the board here, where my General and the Dwarf Warriors declared a charge at the Mournfang Cavalry. They decided to flee. Couldn't believe it. I thought, these cowardly Ogres, they've marched up the board, they've backed off, they've had to struggle with a Gyrocopter, and now they're turning tail and fleeing. They try to redirect into the Ogre Bulls, who flee as well. And my General and the Dwarf Warriors are just left in the middle of the board there, saying, "Fight me, you cowardly Ogres." Now, things didn't go so well, however, for the Longbeards. Now, obviously, the unit has great weapons, so they're swinging at the same time as the Longbeards. However, we've got characters in there that don't have great weapons, so the BSB and the Slaughtermaster. I also wasn't expecting the Slaughtermaster to be so fighty, because obviously it's a level 4 wizard, so I'm thinking, well, at most it's going to have 3 attacks, and he actually had 5 because he had Fencer's Blades, and it's strength 5 as well. And it just totally caught me off guard. I just thought, okay, it's a level 4 wizard, so it's not going to be that fighty. But it really is. And just hacked apart. I think I lost more than 10 longbeards. I think actually you can see from the picture there, it's like 12 or 13 longbeards died, which was just devastating, because even though we did a bunch of wounds, that BSB had a 4-up ward. The Slaughtermaster had the Glittering Scales as well, which was -1 to hit. And of course, we don't get to put that many attacks into the unit because of the characters. So we didn't finish off the unit, and we didn't do that many wounds on the characters, and we lost combat horribly. I was on double ones. However, I did have the Ancestor Rune, which gives me, of course, the chance to roll that break test on a single D6. I failed the first time, but I passed the second time. And that's the great thing about that rune, is that even if you're on double one, the lowest you can go is double ones. It's 2, rather, for a break test. So it gives you got to roll a 1 or a 2 on one dice with a re-roll for the BSB. So the odds are pretty good. You know, it's basically like 50% or something like that, that you're still going to pass that double 1 break test. So they stick, but things are not looking good now that we've lost more than half the unit. And but I still do have my BSB intact for now. The Slayers on the side here, obviously not getting their full quota of attacks, being in the flank. Still get a bunch of death blows, still do a bunch of wounds, but it's going to take them another turn to chew through the rest of those cats and that hunter. And over on the other side of the board, as I said before, the Slayers and the Engineer managed to finish off the other cat pack. So that's how things are looking at the end of turn 3. The Ogre Balls on the far left there managed to finish off that Gyrocopter, of course, and are turning round to help out either the Iron Guts or help out the cat pack, depending on what their priorities are there. Things not looking good for the Dwarves on the left-hand side of the board. I think those Slayers will survive another turn, but those Longbeards and my BSB look like they're going to die next turn. My General, unable to find anyone to fight it, and of course that is the weakness of taking a Dwarf Lord, is that it's quite possible for your enemy to just avoid fighting your Dwarf Lord, and you've got a lot of points. Not so many points in this case, because I haven't given him a proper sort of 300-point loadout. He's only 261 points, but it's still quite a point sink, which is unable to really be that effective, even though I suppose it's making the Ogres flee, so it's doing something, but it may be difficult for me to get those points now. So it looks like, even though I'm winning on that side of the board, I haven't got many points yet. Just that pack of cats and the hunter. So yeah, let's see how things can be improved on turn 4. So the block of 6 Ogre Balls rally, but the Mournfang Cavalry don't and continue fleeing, and they're dangerously close to the edge of the board there, so they'll have one more chance to flee, to rally rather, on turn 5. The Ogre Balls decide to go into the side of the Longbeards, so the writing's really on the wall for those Longbeards now, which leaves the other group of Slayers just fighting against those that pack of cats. Now, you can see what happened there already, right? So those Longbeards got hacked up and ended up breaking and fleeing. However, they did get away, and you can see the 2 units of Ogres hot on the heels of the Longbeards there. There's one cat left, which you can see in the far bottom left of that picture, which the Slayer didn't manage to finish off, even though they've killed the Hunter. I think he was just within range of the General there to use the General's leadership, and therefore passed the break test. So that Saber-Tusk is still alive, and that's how things looked ready for Dwarf turn 4. So finally, with a huge roar, the Dwarf Lord finally makes it into combat. I think Scott was actually pondering another flee with these Ogre Balls, but I think he had a rethink there, as the Mournfang Cavalry obviously failed their rally test and thought, okay, well, I need to actually try and fight at some point. But perhaps if it was a tournament, he might have fled again. But the Dwarves finally make it in. Obviously, they're only sword and board Dwarf warriors, right? So they're only strength 3, strength 4 on the charge. So, you know, the Ogres have still got a very decent charge there, a decent chance rather. However, not today, because the Dwarf Lord soaked up attacks from those 2 Ogres on the right hand side. The Dwarves, obviously the Ogres have got hand weapon and shield, or Iron Fist, I think. So they're fighting at strength 4. So my Dwarves are still getting a 5-up save and a 6-up parry. So the Ogres didn't do too many wounds, and we did a few wounds, but obviously with the charge and the ranks and everything, we managed to blow through those ogres, break them, and run them down. So finally got some decent points on the dwarf side of the table. The Longbeards did rally, but of course they've still got 4 ogres with extra hand weapons staring at them an inch away from them. So there's not much chance that they're going to be able to do much in the charge that's coming, especially as we've all got great weapons, so those ogres are going to go before us, unfortunately. But they are there for one other turn. The Slayers finally finish that last cat and turn around to face the rear of those ogres. The other unit of Slayers with the Engineer there thinking, okay, there's not really enough of us, perhaps we can just preserve our points, as long as that Iron Blaster doesn't pop us off with the cannon. And we go into turn 5. Now, turn 5 then, the board really starts to thin out a little bit because those Mournfang Cavalry fail their rally test and just scarper off the board. So that Mournfang Cavalry really regretting their flee now, having made it all the way up to the halfway line, retreating back to their own Ogre heartlands. That big unit, the unit of 4 balls obviously charged into the Longbeards, wiped them out, and then turned round to face the remaining Slayers there. The main bus of Ogres with the characters in it just continues forward. Not sure what they're going to do, perhaps try and go after the Engineer on those Slayers there to get to mop up some points. And that Iron Blaster just moves out of arc of my Dwarf Lord and the Dwarf Warriors. So my Lord and the Warriors have got points for those 6 Ogres, but it looks like they're going to find it hard to make it into combat now because I've only got 2 turns left and I'm facing the wrong direction. And unfortunately, Dwarves just aren't fast enough to make much use out of that situation. So that's how things look. And on to Dwarfs turn 5. So Dwarfs turn 5. The Slayers are looking at those 4 Ogres thinking our chances aren't good, but today seems like a good day to die. And therefore just go head first into those Ogres. And I also charge in the rear with the Engineer, who was still milling around in the board there. Oh, I forgot to say, of course. So the Iron Blaster, in the last 2 turns, had been trying to knock off this Engineer, because it didn't really have any other good targets to shoot at. It already taken out my Flame Cannon, obviously lost, that's the last War Machine gone. And it started taking pot shots at this Engineer. One time it hit the Engineer and only caused 1 wound, so the Engineer lived. The next time it hit the Engineer again but failed to wound, and so this Engineer was just dodging cannonballs, left, right, and centre. Just one cannonball just stubs his toe, the other one just hits him in the stomach, and he just shrugs it off. And he made it to charge into the rear of these Ogres as well. So I think it's unlikely he's going to survive the rest of the game, but he's certainly a thorn in the Ogre's side. And it actually proved quite decisive, because in the close combat phase, 2 of those Ogres turned round to attack that Engineer, thinking, okay, I think Scott was thinking, he wants to get some points from that Engineer. He's obviously in the rear as well, so by killing him you can take off that +2 combat res. However, it might not have been the best thing to do, because what ended up happening, of course, is that Slayer unit survived, and if that Slayer unit survives, then of course the combat continues, and the Slayers did quite a few wounds. I think one of the Ogres was already wounded from a previous combat, and they did a bunch of wounds, and so it was, I think, killed 2 or 3 of the Ogres in that combat. On the other side of the table then, things were fairly uneventful, because the main block of Ogres isn't really looking to get into combat. It's just sort of marching away so that my Dwarf Lord can't catch it. And the Iron Blast is also trying to avoid my Dwarf Lord. So not much is happening. The Gyrogoblins are dead. It's really just down to this combat here. On Ogre's turn 6, another Ogre dies from the Slayers, and 1 Giant Slayer is left fighting this last Ogre. And it goes down right to the last turn on Dwarf turn 6 to see what will happen. And on the final death throes of the game, this Slayer manages to hack down that last Ogre and win the combat. So a huge swing there from what looked like an impossible situation for this small unit of Slayers. They managed to bring down 4 Ogres against all the odds, and I keep the points for that Slayer unit. So a very enjoyable game. We totted up the points, and it turned out to be a narrow victory for the Ogres. So probably a 12-8 or something on the 20-0 scoring system. There wasn't much left on the table at the end, really. So it was just the Dwarf Lord and his unit, the Slaughtermaster and the Slaughtermaster's unit, one Iron Blaster, and one unit of Slayers. So, you know, we both had 2 units on the board at the end. And just so happens, obviously, there's more points in this Ogre bus than there is in my Dwarf Lord's unit. So the Dwarf Lord and the Dwarf Warriors isn't actually that much. I mean, it looks like it's the sort of, you know, with my general in it in a big block of dwarves, it looks like it should be worth a lot of points, but it's not too much. And I didn't manage to kill that last Iron Gut. So it was 3 characters and 1 of the Iron Guts left. And if I'd killed that last Iron Gut, I think it would have been a narrow victory for the dwarves instead, but it wasn't to be. So tactically then, what went well for the dwarves? You know, a bit of a fluffy list with Slayers and the Sword and Board Warriors, Dwarf Lord, not what I would normally take. But I think they held up their own quite well against the Ogres. The tactical flee that the Mournfang Cavalry and the Bulls did on the right-hand side was very good, I think, because, I mean, I got the points for those units anyway, but it forced my Lord and Warriors quite so far up the board that they weren't able to get back into the fight at all. And that's the way to beat dwarves, isn't it? If you've got to take out their shooting first, and then you've got to divide them, because obviously they're not fast enough to reposition themselves. So you can get some of them out of position, then you can take them on, you know, 1 unit at a time instead of all together. The Gyrocopters, not so effective against Ogres, because obviously their shooting attacks are only strength 3, but they did quite well as chaff. It would have been good to get that last Iron Gut, of course, but having those Ogre units just 3 wide and having the 3 characters there can often prevent you from attacking the unit, so that worked well tactically too. The Flame Cannon was a bit disappointing. The Flame Cannon is often quite disappointing, but it just seems like one day it's going to come off for me really well, because it should be good against Ogres as well. And I did get a few wounds off here and there, but just not crucially when I wanted it to get the good hits. I didn't get them off. You know, losing my organ gun on turn 1, of course, a big disappointment. Just getting first turn for dwarves is so big that that could have swung things in my favour as well. Scott's got a really nicely painted Ogre army. Take a look at it if you get a chance. It's interesting because we both got the Sibor Miniatures models as our general there. So the really cool Slaughtermaster model and my Dwarf Lord model as well. In terms of the comp for the Ogres, as I mentioned in the start, they get the quite a high plus then for taking those units of Saber Tusks and the Hunter, which are really effective. And that's, I think, a good build for Ogres, because, you know, when Scott said he was turning up with a +4 or +5 list or something like that, I thought, okay, well, he's not going to have 2 Iron Blasters. You know, it'll probably be a Highlander. But that's quite a good way of building a list. Anyway, really enjoyable battle line game there. Hope you guys enjoyed it too. As usual, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Sorry about the sirens in the background there. And speak to you all soon. Goodbye.